We appear to have arrived at the moment, in Canada at least, when the fake news media is responsible for covering the fake news. The other day, it was Wednesday of last week, Jody Wilson-Raybould, who was Canada's Attorney General and Minister of Justice, no slouch, testified before Parliament that the Prime Minister's office has at its disposal a roster of people on whom it can call to write friendly op-eds, which can be used to sway public opinion in favor of the government, no matter what the government does. Because in this case, the Attorney General was being asked to engage in political interference in a criminal prosecution. And Katie Telford, the Chief of Staff of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, assured the Attorney General's assistant that there would be no problems because she could just make a call and get, quote, a lot of people to write op-eds that would paint this all in a light that favored the government and the Attorney General. It was an astounding bombshell moment, in my opinion. But don't take my word for it. What I want to start with today is something from Ken White, the former editor of the National Post, one of Canada's premier newspapers. It used to be considered centrist, but in today's weird political climate, I would assume it's considered right, if not far right, whatever that even means today. Let's look at what he said on his Twitter. Ken White says, as a former newspaper editor, the creepiest thing about Jody Wilson-Raybould's testimony was when they told her, go ahead, cross the line, and we'll arrange a shitload of op-eds to justify your move. Thank you, Ken. I couldn't have said it better myself and didn't when I just tried. Let's look at the rest of that, though. He says, that's not a partisan thing either. Editors need to be extremely cautious about taking op-eds from hacks and consultants and others close to governments because you become vulnerable to shit like this. Credible op-ed pages should have no part of party activists and consultants. In this video, I'm going to go over how the press has responded to this, not only the Raybould testimony, but Ken White coming out and saying that. I want to go over Rob Silver's reaction after people realized that he may in fact still be working for Crestview Strategy, an elected official's PR firm that says that it finds individuals to mobilize on behalf of their clients. I mean, if you think about that language, that pretty much sounds like what Katie Telford said when she said we can find people to write friendly op-eds. And I'm just going to show you what happens when a press system, including social media, is almost totally compromised by think tanks, by partisanship, foundation money, and super uber progressive left-leaning all the way to the left commentators. So Ken White said what he said, and in response, I'm just going to show you two replies. First, I'll start here with Althea Raj. Althea Raj, as you can see, works for HuffPost Canada, and she is a frequent at-issue panelist. So we're talking about the Huffington Post and the CBC, which is Canada's state broadcaster. She says she may be mistaken, but I think this was meant as stakeholders, not journalists, who would speak in favor of government decisions. This is no different than what was done in the Harper PMO. Think of all stakeholders lined up to support government policy and budgets. Right. Is this supposed to excuse it, Althea? Yes, all the powerful stakeholders would of course support it. I don't get how that's a defense, but she seems to think it is, because I think that people of a certain age group have grown up in such a stew of corruption that they honestly don't see corruption. They don't even understand what it really is. Okay, so the second person here is Amanda Alvaro. Or Alvaro, I don't know. And she's a bit more snotty about it. In response to Ken White's tweet that he finds this creepy and dangerous, she says, "Do people really not know what an op-ed is? The context, I'm sure, would be to have third-party voices write favorable pieces to be submitted to the papers, who would independently decide whether they would run. This is not an unusual comm strategy for any government," she says. Again, is this a case of younger people being brought up in such a stew of corruption that they don't understand that it is wholly inappropriate for stakeholders who probably won't be revealed to be stakeholders being published in papers in support of themselves, essentially? I mean, a stakeholder, anyway, you know what a stakeholder is. Let's look at who Amanda Alvaro is. She has her own consulting firm that does reputation management. Here she is here. It's called Pomp and Circumstance. Before launching Pomp and Circumstance, Amanda founded and ran another Toronto-based PR agency. When she's not at Pomp and Circumstance, you can find her bantering politics on CBC TV's Power and Politics as a regular commentator. And recently she served as a proud member of the Trudeau campaign. Just incidentally, for people more interested in the deep state, you'll note she's co-founder of the Canadian charity Artbound, which has built art schools and provided funds to children in communities in Kenya, India, and Guatemala. There may or may not be any malfeasance there, but as I said, if you've been following along with the very deep corruption, you know that that is actually, and sadly, a red flag at this point in our history. But Amanda Alvaro's interesting ties don't stop there. And this point requires you to remember what I said at the beginning, that it's Katie Telford who is the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. Katie Telford is the person who said, we have a whole bunch of people we can call to write favorable op-eds. In an article in Chatelaine magazine, which is linked to in the description box, you can see here that it says, Katie Telford's friend and Kennedy's communication director at the time, Amanda Alvaro, recalls major Kennedy backers in Ottawa threatening to walk away from this, blah, blah, blah. This woman and this woman are friends going way back. So, when she discounts Ken White's statements, are we to take her seriously, or are we to believe that perhaps she is on the roster of people that Katie Telford can call to spin everything the government does in a favorable light? I wonder. Keep in mind this whole phrase op-ed. What is an op-ed? We know them as opinion editorials, right? And we can all write, anybody's free to write into the newspaper, and you think you stand an equal chance of getting published. But do you, in this climate, when you know there's all these PR firms out there jostling for space? If you don't have name recognition, will you get published? If you're not on the right side of an issue, will you get published? Who knows? I mean, there's more op-ed writers than there are editors. The editors are the ones who allegedly select which op-eds to go into papers, but how hard would it be to compromise or pay off the editors? There's not that many of them. You just say, hey, you're going to be getting an op-ed by Amanda Alvaro today. Will you please publish it? I'm just guessing. I'm just guessing that that's how it works. But knowing that they are connected to one another, it seems like Amanda's op-ed might get published ahead of somebody else's. And one more small point. I kind of consider Twitter posts these days to be op-eds. Twitter is a very far-reaching platform. And although the tweets are not very long, sometimes people do whole threads strung together. They are op-eds that can be, they're interactive. They're like interactive op-eds. So you can activate a whole host of Twitter personalities, especially the ones like Althea Raj and Amanda Alvaro that have these blue checks. They're taken more seriously. The blue check set on Twitter is a thing. It's like how they distinguish the classes on Twitter. Does Ken White have a blue check? Let's see. Oh, he doesn't. The former editor of the National Post in Canada, well known, and obviously it's a legit account because we see the blue checks responding to it. He does not have a blue check. Are you starting to see the caste system in terms of opinion makers? Are you starting to see what Katie Telford knows about how to shape public opinion? What did the rest of the press have to say about this? Well, it's kind of hard for me to suss it out because a lot of them are behind paywalls and I can't get a good handle on everything behind the paywalls. But let's have a look at a sampling of them. Here's from the Globe and Mail, Canada's other premier newspaper. From Simon Haupt, write op-eds saying what she is doing is proper. What the Wilson-Raybould testimony reveals about the politics of newspaper opinion pieces. Now, he goes on to more or less apologize for it and say, oh my gosh, much ado about nothing. You shouldn't be worried about it. The reaction to this, the implication that the Prime Minister's office might have pliant editors on speed dial was swift and damning. And here he mentions Ken White. Here's another article from the Star, totally left-leaning newspaper. Newspaper editors, not politicians, determine which op-eds are published. And they scoff at the notion that Katie Telford or the PMO could phone up the newspaper and have op-eds published. Well, yeah, they got to convince the editors, but who says that's impossible? And finally here, this is very interesting commentary on the whole thing from someone who wrote to the Globe and Mail. Don't worry, opinion writers aren't for hire, he says. Andrew McDougall. And you know what? This whole article is worth a video on its own. It's very long. I mean, here's the gist of his argument. The gist of his argument is, if a scandal breaks out and a politician were to write to the paper and try to explain it, everybody would know they're just making excuses for themselves. And then he says, but what if someone else said it on their behalf? What if you opened your paper or clicked on your favorite news site, or, heaven forbid, relied on Facebook to shove an article into your feed and saw a respected political scientist from a Canadian university calling for the same thing? Would that open your mind to the argument? It might. And that's what political operatives of all stripes count on, whether it's to get them out of a scandal or to build up support for the government's policy position on more benign files. Finding supportive voices outside of government to buttress your argument is a political tool as old as time. No doubt. But is it ethical? I've seen a lot of people say, well, what else is new? This is what's always gone on. Big surprise. And to that I say, so has child sex abuse. Child sex abuse is as old as time. It's always gone on. People from all over do it. But don't you want to stop it? having partisan hacks or stakeholders, as Althea Raj calls them, chime in using their credentials, pretending they don't have an interest in the outcome of the debate. Having them chime in and get published and be spread all over the public consciousness is a threat to democracy. More than that, it can be a threat to the rule of law. It's a threat to our very way of life. It undermines everything. I mean, think of the open borders debate. Hasn't it boggled your mind that you haven't seen an actual debate anywhere about whether or not this is good? Hasn't it really confused you as to why everybody that is getting published is on the same side on this issue? Haven't you said to yourself, this can't be true? There's got to be people who aren't racists, who oppose open borders. Well, where are they? I'll tell you, they're being silenced. They're being called Nazis. They're being called alt-right. They're being called xenophobes. They're being characterized as dangerous. They're being silenced. They're being censored. And all these friendlies are somehow being rewarded for their allegiance to government policy. So it is an ultra big threat to our democracy and our way of life. It's a threat to our children's future. And the government admits it. As I showed in my last video, they are concerned about Canada's democratic process. They go over on this page how we need true, fulsome, timely, and factual information to make our decisions. Well, what do you call it when all of the pundits and all of the op-ed writers are on the government call sheet? Hey, buddy, we like open borders, and remember when we helped you out of a jam a while back? Can you write us a nice op-ed that says you believe in open borders too? You see where I'm going with this? I have a lot more to say on this issue, but I think I'll leave it here in the interest of time. The one thing I want to show you that is a hilarious joke is the guy who wrote this article that I said was worth the read in full, and the links to which I will put in the description box. Do you think he was just some rando? Andrew McDougall, special to Global News. He wrote this yesterday. He does a masterful job of explaining why we don't have to worry about the government asking people to write favorable op-eds. But who is he? Did he think nobody would check? Well, he's never met me. Andrew McDougall works for, and they admit in the last paragraph, Andrew McDougall is a director with London, UK-based consultancy Trafalgar Strategy. And, as he says above, was previously director of communications for Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper. You see, I think they thought getting a Harper acolyte would help them with their cause. But not for free-thinking individuals who are not partisan. We don't care which side you're on. We don't want some hack writing the op-ed. Trafalgar Strategy advises on reputation and media management campaigns, public affairs, and complex communication challenges. David Cameron's former PR man Giles Kenningham forms new agency Trafalgar Strategy. I mean, just look at that guy. I trust him completely. And it's a little bit like how Amanda Alvaro was recently a proud member of the Trudeau campaign and worked with Katie Telford, and how Katie Telford's husband was a founding partner at Crestview, which specializes in mobilization campaigns that are premised on the simple fact that elected officials need influencers, And Crestview finds and activates individuals to track and move them along an activist journey and mobilize them to take action in support of the client's campaign objectives. Is there a single person writing an op-ed in support of this who isn't linked back to some think tank or married to a member of our Prime Minister's office? Or on the take in some globalist think tank network? Is there even one? I don't know. Finally, let's look at what Rob Silver himself has to say. You see, in my last video, I made the argument that Rob Silver may not have left Crestview's strategy when he said he did. And if he didn't, then it's very concerning that his wife, Katie Telford, who is the chief of staff of Justin Trudeau, said that she has an army of people she can call on to write friendly op-eds, considering that Crestview's strategy has these mobilization campaigns for elected officials. I made that video, which you can go back and watch, and Rob Silver has taken a little bit of heat about Crestview since then, and I thought I would look and see how he handled himself. In this tweet, Rob Silver is replying to Teresa. Teresa had said, Katie Telford's husband is Rob Silver, who said he stepped down from Crestview, but hasn't. Crestview is a political influence machine, right about that. Now, of course, I didn't make the statement that Rob Silver hasn't stepped down from Crestview, but I showed you evidence that may indicate that he has not, or at least that he didn't until the end of April 2018. What does Rob Silver say in reply to that? He makes a threat. He says, "Hi, Teresa. I will assume that you're a real person. That may or may not be a safe assumption. You know that saying things that aren't true on Twitter can have real-life consequences, right? I think you should apologize for lying about me. Thanks." I would consider that to be a threat. It's a veiled threat, of course. And that's the liberal specialty, isn't it? Jody Wilson-Raybould testified the other day that she was subjected to months of veiled threats and pressure from the PMO's office, especially by Katie Telford. And she's married to Robert Silver. And Rob Silver is currently engaged in threatening members of the public that ask him questions. Seems like birds of a feather to me. I also, incidentally, asked Rob Silver if he could please clarify when exactly he left Crestview Communications or Crestview Strategy. He hasn't answered me. I asked him 3 times. Here's one of the examples. But he's ignoring me. I want to point out that I've been on YouTube for 3 years. 3 years now. And I've never had a strike for a guideline violation. But I did the day after I published my video about Rob Silver and the press being on speed dial for Katie Telford and the PMO. I don't know, do I have a screen grab? Yes, I do. Is it a coincidence that the day after I make a video about Canada's fake news industry, Crestview Strategy, and Rob Silver, I get my first notice from YouTube that one of my very old videos has been flagged and restricted? They said that my video about Islamophobia and treason in Canada was flagged for potential hate speech. But what you have to understand about YouTube's non-rules is that you don't have to violate them. They say it straight up. If you come close to maybe violating them, they can still restrict your videos. So I think I am over a target. All of a sudden, my videos are being flagged? How does the news about fake news get out? It's very difficult because the editors of the fake news outlets are all guilty. I'm going to stop talking now. Thanks very much for listening, everybody. Please leave a thumbs up. Please comment. Please subscribe if you haven't, and share the video. My links to my BitChute and my paypal.me are in the description box, along with references from this video. And I would suggest you go back and watch my last video if you haven't already, where I show you the proof, or I show you the evidence that Rob Silver might still be working for Crestview Strategy. All right, until next time, peace out.